Silence is usually a sign of defeat. In a courtroom, it's often an admission of guilt. But for London Calloway, silence was a weapon. She sat there for 3 days, watching her billionaire husband destroy her reputation, listening to his high-priced lawyer tear her life apart, and she didn't say a single word. Everyone thought she was broken. Everyone thought the verdict was already decided. But they were wrong. They didn't know that London was just waiting for the one mistake they didn't even know they were making. And when the judge finally asked one unexpected question, the silence didn't just break, it shattered everything. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B of the Superior Court of California hummed with a low, monotonous drone, a stark contrast to the stifling tension that gripped the room. It was the 3rd day of Calloway Ver. Calloway, the divorce trial that had already been dubbed by the local tabloids as the gentleman's slaughter. On the right side of the aisle sat Robert Calloway. At 42, Robert was the picture of American success. He was the CEO of Calloway Logistics, a shipping empire that moved goods from the chaotic ports of Shanghai to the calm docks of San Francisco. He wore a navy blue bespoke suit that probably cost more than the court reporter's car. His posture was relaxed, leaning back slightly in his leather chair, whispering occasionally to his lead counsel, Arthur Prescott. Arthur Prescott was a shark in a silk tie. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you didn't just want to win. You wanted to salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a reputation for burying opponents under mountains of paperwork and intimidation. On the left side of the aisle sat London. London Calloway. Formerly, London Bennett looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She wore a simple grey cardigan over a white blouse, her brown hair pulled back in a severe fraying bun. She was 39, but under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom, she looked 10 years older. There were dark circles bruised beneath her eyes, and her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Knuckles white, holding on to nothing but each other. She had no team of paralegals. She had no shark. Beside her sat Simon Tate, a court-appointed attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Simon was shuffling papers nervously, occasionally glancing at London, as if hoping she would suddenly wake up and give him something to work with. But she gave him nothing. For 3 days, London had been a statue. She hadn't objected when Robert described her as emotionally unstable. She hadn't flinched when Arthur Prescott entered bank statements into evidence showing erratic spending. She hadn't even cried when they brought up the incident at the school fundraiser. The incident that Robert claimed proved she was an unfit mother to their 8-year-old daughter Sophie. The gallery was packed. Half of them were reporters, pens poised, hungry for the fall of a socialite. The other half were former friends of the couple, the elite of San Francisco society, who had drunk London's wine and eaten at her table, now whispering behind their hands, eager to see her exiled. "Mr. Prescott," Judge Harriet O'Malley said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Judge O'Malley was a woman of fierce intellect, known for her no-nonsense attitude and her reading glasses, which she perched precariously on the end of her nose. She had seen everything in her 20 years on the bench, or so she thought. "Call your next witness." Arthur Prescott stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. "Your Honor, the petitioner calls Dr. Frederick Haynes to the stand." A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. Dr. Haynes was a high-profile psychiatrist. If he was testifying, Robert was going for the throat. He wasn't just trying to divorce London. He was trying to have her declared incompetent. London didn't move. She stared straight ahead at the wood grain of the witness stand, her expression unreadable. Simon Tate leaned over, whispering frantically. "London, we need to object to Haynes. He's a paid expert witness. If we don't challenge his credentials now, the judge will accept his evaluation as fact. London. London turned her head slowly. Her eyes were a striking clear green, usually full of life, but now they were flat like a pond in winter. She looked at Simon, blinked once, and then turned back to the front. "No," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken since the bailiff swore her in 2 days ago. "No," Simon hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "London, he's going to say you're crazy. He's going to take everything." "Let him speak," London said softly. Her voice wasn't weak. It was quiet, but it had the density of lead. Dr. Haynes took the stand. He was a small man with a goatee and a demeanor of aggressive intelligence. Under Prescott's smooth questioning, Haynes painted a devastating picture. "Mrs. Calloway exhibits classic signs of dissociative personality traits and severe narcissism." Haynes droned, gesturing to a chart he had helpfully prepared. The isolation, the refusal to engage in social functions, the erratic outbursts. "It is my professional opinion that she is a danger to the stability of the child." "And would you say," Prescott asked, leaning on the railing of the jury box, though there was no jury, "only Judge O'Malley, that Mr. Calloway has done everything possible to support her?" "Oh, absolutely." Haynes nodded vigorously. "Mr. Calloway has been a saint. He has paid for therapy. He has covered for her social absences. He has tried to keep the family together, despite immense strain." It was a lie. A carefully constructed, expensive lie. Robert Calloway sat at his table, looking down at his hands with a practiced look of sorrow, as if hearing this diagnosis broke his heart. But London saw the twitch at the corner of his mouth, a microscopic smirk. He thought he had won. He thought silence was submission. Judge O'Malley looked over her glasses at London. "Mr. Tate, cross-examination." Simon Tate stood up. His suit rumpled. He looked at London, begging for a lifeline. She gave him none. He sighed. "No questions for this witness, Your Honor." The gallery gasped. Even Robert looked up, surprised. No cross-examination of the key expert witness. It was legal suicide. Judge O'Malley frowned, her brow furrowing deep. "Mr. Tate, are you sure this testimony is quite damaging to your client's case for custody?" "My client instructs me not to cross-examine," Simon said, his voice cracking slightly. "Very well," the judge said, though she looked at London with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Witness dismissed." As Haynes stepped down, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It felt heavy, suffocating. Robert leaned over to Prescott. "She's given up," he whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. "She knows she can't fight the truth." Prescott nodded, closing his file. "We wrap this up today, Robert. You'll have the house, the accounts, and full custody by Friday." But London wasn't looking at Robert. She was looking at the court reporter, watching her fingers fly across the stenotype machine, recording every lie, every fabrication, cementing them into the permanent record. She wasn't giving up. She was gathering ammunition. The petitioner calls Robert James Calloway to the stand. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The golden boy of the Bay Area logistics scene was going to tell his side of the story. Robert stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the stand with the stride of a man who owned the floor. He walked on. He was sworn in. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked at Judge O'Malley with a charming, respectful smile. "Mr. Calloway." Prescott began, his voice soft, almost sympathetic. "Tell the court why we are here today." Robert sighed, a heavy, tragic sound. "I love my wife, Your Honor. Or, I loved the woman she used to be." But the last 3 years have been a nightmare. I've tried to hide it to protect her reputation and for the sake of our daughter Sophie. What kind of nightmare? Prescott prodded. Paranoia, Robert said sadly. She started accusing me of things, insane things, hiding money, having affairs following her. She installed tracking apps on my phone. She would call my office 20 times a day. London sat perfectly still. Her hands were still clasped. She remembered the phone calls. She remembered calling the office because the school had called to say Sophie wasn't picked up and Robert was supposed to be there. She remembered the tracking app because Robert had installed it on her phone, claiming it was for her safety, but really it was to monitor her every move. And the finances? Prescott asked. The prenuptial agreement states that in the event of a divorce caused by infidelity or mental instability, the assets remain separate. Is that correct? It is, Robert said. I built Callaway Logistics from the ground up. London. She never worked. She enjoyed the lifestyle. The trips to Paris, the house in Pacific Heights. But she became greedy. She started withdrawing large sums of cash. When I asked her about it, she would scream at me. How much cash, Mr. Callaway? Over the last year, nearly $200,000. Robert lied effortlessly. The judge scribbled a note. 200,000. It was a significant amount. And did you ever find out what she did with the money? I suspect. Gambling. Robert lowered his voice. Or perhaps illicit substances. I found pills in her vanity. I didn't want to bring this up, but he looked at the judge with pleading eyes. I just want my daughter to be safe. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was weaving a narrative where he was the long-suffering provider and she was the parasitic, unstable addict. Thank you, Mr. Callaway, Prescott said, looking satisfied. Your witness. Simon Tate stood up. He looked at his notes. He looked at London. She finally moved. She reached into her tote bag, a cheap canvas thing that looked out of place next to Robert's leather briefcase. She pulled out a single small notebook. It was black with a red elastic band. She slid it across the table to Simon. Simon looked at it, then at her. She tapped the cover once with her index finger. Simon opened it. His eyes widened. He flipped a few pages. He looked up at Robert, then back at the book. A strange look crossed his face. Confusion, then realization. Then a spark of something that looked like hope. He walked to the podium. Mr. Callaway, Simon began, his voice stronger now. You stated that my client withdrew $200,000 for gambling or drugs. That is my belief, yes, Robert said smoothly. And you stated you built your company from the ground up entirely on your own, with hard work and grit, Robert confirmed. Mr. Callaway, do you recognize the date November 14th, 2019? Robert frowned slightly. He looked at the ceiling, pretending to think. I can't say that I do. It's just a date. Nothing significant happened that day. No business deals, no arguments. Not that I recall, Robert said dismissively. And what about the name Project Orion? For a split second, just a heartbeat, the charm slipped from Robert's face. His eyes darted to his lawyer, Prescott. It was so fast that if you blinked, you would have missed it. But London didn't blink. Project Orion. Robert laughed, but it sounded brittle. Sounds like a sci-fi movie. I have no idea what you're talking about. So you deny the existence of a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Orion Holdings. Objection. Prescott shot up. Relevance. We are discussing domestic custody, not corporate law. Mr. Tate is fishing. It goes to the witness's credibility regarding finances, Your Honor, Simon argued. Judge O'Malley adjusted her glasses. I'll allow it, but make it quick, Mr. Tate. I have no knowledge of any Orion holdings, Robert said firmly, regaining his composure. My business is entirely domestic. Thank you, Simon said. He didn't press it. He just closed the notebook. No further questions. Robert stepped down, feeling a strange itch between his shoulder blades. He didn't like that question. Project Orion was buried deep. There was no way London knew about it. She was too busy crying over her lost youth and pop pills to understand complex offshore structuring. He sat back down next to Prescott. What was that? He hissed. Desperation, Prescott whispered back. He's throwing spaghetti at the wall. Ignore it. We're winning. But London wasn't looking at the wall. She was looking at the judge. The trial dragged on. Witnesses came and went. The nanny paid by Robert testified that London was distant. The housekeeper paid by Robert testified that London drank wine at 10 a.m. Through it all, London remained silent. She didn't testify. When the time came for the defense to present their case, Simon Tate simply stood up and said, "The defense rests." The courtroom erupted in murmurs again. No defense. No character witnesses. It was over. Judge O'Malley looked stunned. Mr. Calloway, you understand that by not offering a defense, the court must make a decision based solely on the evidence presented by the petitioner. London stood up. It was the first time she had stood while the court was in session, other than to enter or leave. I understand, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was clear. I believe the truth has already been told. It just hasn't been heard yet. Robert rolled his eyes. Cryptic nonsense, he thought. Very well, Judge O'Malley said, clearly frustrated by the lack of a fight. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for closing arguments and my ruling. London sat down. Robert turned to her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It's over, London. You should have taken the settlement when I offered it. Now you get nothing. London turned her head. She looked him dead in the eye. I don't want your money, Robert, she said. Then what do you want? He scoffed. I want you to answer the question. What question? You'll see. That evening, the mood in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis Hotel was electric. Robert Calloway held a crystal tumbler of aged scotch, the amber liquid catching the light of the chandelier. He was surrounded by his inner circle, a group of sycophants, junior executives, and of course Arthur Prescott. To justice, Prescott said, raising his glass with a smirk, and to the fact that silence is indeed consent. Robert laughed, the sound booming in the opulent room. Did you see her? She looked like a frightened rabbit. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. He took a long sip of the scotch. It tasted like victory. For years, London had been a thorn in his side, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she was there. She was a constant reminder of the time before he was a titan of industry, back when he was just a logistics manager with a dream and a pile of debt. She knew the man he used to be, and Robert hated that man. He wanted to erase him, and erasing London was the final step. You really think the judge will grant full custody? Robert asked, a flicker of genuine anxiety piercing his arrogance. Sophie was the only thing he truly cared about, not as a person, perhaps, but as a legacy, an extension of himself. Without a doubt, Prescott assured him, loosening his tie. She offered no defense, Robert. In the eyes of the law, she accepted every accusation we hurled at her. The drug use, the instability, the neglect. It's a slam dunk. Dr. Haynes's testimony was the nail in the coffin. By noon tomorrow, you'll be a single man with full custody, and she'll be lucky if she gets supervised visitation once a month." Robert nodded, satisfied. He walked to the window, looking out over the glittering skyline of San Francisco. Somewhere out there, in a small rented apartment in the Mission District, London was probably crying into a pillow. But London wasn't crying. At that exact moment, London sat at a chipped formica table in her temporary apartment. The room was sparse: a bed, a table, a chair. It was a far cry from the Pacific Heights mansion she had been kicked out of 3 months prior. On the table sat the black notebook. Next to it was a burner phone and a stack of printed emails. Simon Tate sat across from her, looking pale. He was drinking lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, his hand shaking slightly. "London," Simon said, his voice trembling. "Do you understand what you have here? If we use this isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is federal prison time, for him, and maybe for you if they think you were complicit." London ran her hand over the cover of the notebook. "I wasn't complicit, Simon. I was blind. There's a difference." "The judge might not see it that way," Simon warned. "Project Orion. I looked into the shell companies you listed. It's terrifying. They aren't just moving electronics, London. They're moving uncertified lithium batteries and industrial waste under false manifests. If one of those ships caught fire—" "But they didn't," London said calmly. "Because Robert pays off the inspectors. That's what's in the ledger on page 42. The bribes. Why didn't we lead with this?" Simon asked, frustrated. "Why sit there for 3 days and let them drag your name through the mud? Why let them call you a junkie?" London looked up, her green eyes sharp as flint. "Because Simon Robert is a narcissist. If I had attacked him on day 1, he would have settled. He would have buried this evidence, paid me off, and disappeared. He would have kept Sophie, and he would have kept doing it." She took a breath. "I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to stand under oath and deny the existence of Orion. I needed him to commit perjury on the record." Simon stared at her. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. They saw a housewife who lunched. They didn't see the woman who had managed the household accounts for a decade. The woman who noticed when the numbers didn't add up. The woman who had learned to be invisible so she could listen. "He thinks I'm weak," London whispered. "He thinks I stayed quiet because I was broken. He forgot that predators are quietest right before they strike." "Tomorrow is closing arguments," Simon said. "The judge is going to rule immediately after. We have 1 shot." "I know," London said. "Do exactly as I said. Don't present the evidence yet." "What?" Simon choked on his coffee. "But trust me," London said. "Judge O'Malley is smart. She's been watching Robert. She doesn't like him. I can see it in her eyes. She knows something is wrong. We have to wait for her to ask." "Ask what?" "The right question." The courtroom on day 4 felt like a funeral home. The reporters were bored, expecting a routine closing statement and a swift gavel bang. Robert Calloway sat relaxed, checking his watch. He had a golf tee time at 2. Judge O'Malley entered her robes billowing. She looked tired. She sat down, arranged her papers, and peered over her glasses. "All right," she said, her voice gravelly. "Closing arguments. Mr. Prescott, you may proceed." Arthur Prescott stood up. He didn't even use notes. He walked back and forth before the bench, weaving a story of a tragic, successful man burdened by a mentally ill wife. Your Honor, Prescott boomed. This case is simple. On one side, you have Mr. Calloway, a pillar of the community, a job creator, a devoted father. On the other, you have a woman who has unfortunately succumbed to her own demons. The evidence is uncontested. The drug paraphernalia, the erratic behavior, the financial irresponsibility. Mrs. Calloway has offered no defense because there is no defense. To leave a child in her care would be negligence. We ask for full legal and physical custody, with no alimony, due to the violation of the infidelity clause in the prenup manifested here as financial infidelity. He sat down, looking like a man who had just sunk a winning basket. Mr. Tate. The judge turned to the defense table. Simon Tate stood up. His legs felt like jelly, but he looked at London and she gave him a barely perceptible nod. Your Honor, Simon said, his voice surprisingly steady. The petitioner claims my client is unstable. They claim she is erratic. Yet for 3 days, she has sat here with dignity while they dismantled her life. Silence is not admission, Your Honor. Sometimes, silence is the only shield a victim has left. We ask the court to look beyond the expensive suits and the paid experts. We ask the court to look at the truth. That was it. He sat down. Robert let out a snort of laughter that he quickly turned into a cough. That was the closing argument. Look at the truth. It was pathetic. Judge O'Malley stared at Simon, then at London. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She picked up a pen, hovered it over her judgment form, and then set it down. The silence in the room stretched. 10 seconds. 20. Robert shifted in his seat. Why wasn't she ruling? Judge O'Malley looked at Robert. Her eyes were piercing. She had been a judge for 20 years. She had seen liars, thieves, and murderers, and she had seen plenty of wealthy men who thought they could buy the law. Something about Dr. Haynes's testimony bothered her. It was too perfect, and something about Robert's testimony bothered her even more. He was too smooth, but the law was the law. The evidence was on his side. She had to rule based on facts, not feelings. She cleared her throat. I'm prepared to issue my ruling, she said. Robert straightened his tie, ready to stand up and shake hands. However, Judge O'Malley continued, her voice freezing him in place, there is one discrepancy that I cannot reconcile. She picked up a piece of paper from the stack of evidence, Robert's financial affidavit. Mr. Calloway, she said, please stand. Robert stood, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Yes, Your Honor. You testified that your wife withdrew $200,000, which you suspect was for drugs or gambling. You also testified that your business is entirely domestic, and that you have no offshore holdings. That is correct, Your Honor, Robert said confidently. The judge narrowed her eyes. I'm looking at the bank transfer records submitted by your counsel to prove Mrs. Calloway's withdrawals. These transfers were made to an account labeled consulting fees. Yes, she likely set up a dummy account to hide her addiction, Robert improvised. Perhaps, the judge said. She paused. This was the moment. The air in the room seemed to vanish. But Miss Calloway, the judge asked, leaning forward, if your wife was stealing this money for drugs, why does the routing number on her withdrawal match the deposit routing number for the payment of your expert witness? Dr. Haynes and... This is the part that confuses me. A company called Orion Holdings. The color drained from Robert's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. London didn't smile, but under the table she opened the black notebook. I don't know what you mean, Robert stammered. Clerical error. My accountants must have mixed up the papers." "A clerical error." The judge's voice dropped an octave. "Mr. Calloway, are you telling me that your wife's stolen money went into the same offshore account that pays your payroll?" Robert looked at Prescott. Prescott looked horrified. He hadn't checked the routing numbers on the bank statements. He had just submitted the amounts. He had been so arrogant, so sure that London wouldn't check that he had been sloppy. Robert started. "Mrs. Calloway," the judge said, turning her gaze to London. It wasn't the question London expected, but it was the opening she needed. "Mrs. Calloway," Judge O'Malley asked, her voice softening, but retaining its steel. "You have been silent for this entire trial. I have a feeling you know exactly why those routing numbers match. Is there something you have been waiting to tell this court?" London stood up. She picked up the black notebook. "Yes, Your Honor," London said. Her voice rang out, clear and strong, shattering the image of the broken woman. "I didn't steal that money. Robert moved it. He moved it to Orion Holdings to pay for the cleanup of a chemical spill in the port of Oakland that he never reported. And the reason I know this," she held up the notebook, "is because I kept the books he thought he deleted." The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. Prescott slammed his hand on the table. "Objection. This is ambush evidence. This was not in discovery. Overruled," Judge O'Malley roared, slamming her gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Prescott, or I will hold you in contempt." She turned back to London. "Bring that notebook to the bench, now." Robert slumped into his chair. He felt like the floor was opening up. He looked at London, really looked at her for the first time in years. He didn't see a victim. He saw the executioner. London walked to the bench, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound was like the ticking of a clock counting down the final seconds of Robert's career. She handed the notebook to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge O'Malley. The courtroom was in chaos, but a hushed chaos. Everyone was straining to see the judge's reaction. Judge O'Malley opened the book. She flipped through the first few pages. Her expression went from curiosity to shock and then to a deep, dark anger. "Mr. Tate," the judge said without looking up, "does this notebook contain what I think it contains? It contains the handwritten ledgers of the off-book logistics for Calloway." "Logistics," Simon said, his confidence now soaring. "It details the transport of Class A hazardous materials through residential zones to avoid permit fees. It details bribes paid to Port Authority officials. And specifically regarding this case, it details the payments made to Dr. Frederick Haynes, $50,000, 2 days before he evaluated my client." The gallery gasped. All eyes turned to Dr. Haynes, who was sitting in the back row, hoping to get paid. He suddenly looked like he wanted to vanish into the drywall. "That is a lie," Robert shouted, standing up. "She forged it. She's crazy. Sit down, Mr. Calloway." The judge pointed a finger at him, like a loaded weapon. "One more outburst and you will be in handcuffs before this trial is over." She turned back to the notebook. "Mr. Prescott, were you aware of these payments?" Arthur Prescott was pale. He was a shark, but he wasn't stupid. He knew when a ship was sinking. "Your Honor, I have never seen this document before. I was acting on the information provided by my client." "You threw him under the bus," Robert hissed at his lawyer. "Shut up," Prescott whispered back, closing his briefcase. "You're on your own." "Mrs. Calloway," the judge said, "you claim these are your husband's writings. They are your honor," London said. "And if you look at the date on page 112, November 14th, 2019. The judge flipped to the page. The date Mr. Calloway claimed nothing significant happened, the judge read aloud. Entry Orion transfer complete, 200K. Haynes retainer secure. Spill containment in Sector 4 unreported. Crisis averted. The judge looked up, removing her glasses slowly. The silence that followed was heavier than the one London had held for 3 days. Mr. Calloway, the judge said, her voice terrifyingly calm. You testified under oath not 10 minutes ago that you had no knowledge of Orion Holdings. You testified that you did not pay Dr. Haynes beyond his standard court fees. You testified that your wife stole this money. Robert stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. There was no charm left. No bespoke suit could hide the sweat pouring down his face. I can explain. Robert tried. It's complex corporate structuring. London doesn't understand business. I understand perjury, the judge snapped. And I understand fraud. She looked at the bailiff. Secure the courtroom. No one leaves. Then she looked at London. Mrs. Calloway, why did you wait until now? You could have submitted this during discovery. You could have saved this court 3 days of time. London stood tall. Your Honor, if I had submitted this earlier, his lawyers would have buried it in motions. They would have claimed it was forged. They would have sealed the records. I needed him to deny it on the stand. I needed him to lie to you. A small smile touched the corner of Judge O'Malley's lips. It was a smile of respect. Well played, Mrs. Calloway, she murmured. Then the judge turned her full fury onto Robert. Robert Calloway, I am finding you in direct contempt of court for perjury. I am striking your entire testimony from the record. Furthermore, I am referring this notebook to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into fraud, environmental violations, and bribery. Robert gripped the table. You can't do that. I am the CEO of... You are a liar in my courtroom, the judge shouted. And as for the custody of Sophie Calloway, she paused, writing furiously on her order form. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to the mother, London Calloway. The prenuptial agreement is hereby voided due to the fraudulent financial disclosures made by the petitioner. All assets hidden in the Orion Holdings accounts are to be frozen immediately. Robert looked at Arthur Prescott. Do something. Prescott stood up, picked up his briefcase, and looked at Robert with disdain. I think you need a criminal lawyer, Robert. I only handle divorce. And with that, Prescott turned and walked out of the courtroom. But the drama wasn't over. As the bailiff moved to place Robert in handcuffs for the contempt charge, the doors to the back of the courtroom burst open. 2 men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back stepped in. Robert Calloway, one of them announced. Robert went pale as a sheet. Yes, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding the trafficking of prohibited industrial materials and wire fraud. Please step away from the table. London watched as the man who had terrorized her for years, the man who had made her feel small and insane, was cuffed and led away in front of the flashing cameras of the press. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The weight was gone. Simon Tate leaned over to her. You did it, London. You actually did it. London opened her eyes. We did it, Simon. So what now? He asked. London looked at the empty chair where Robert had sat. Now I go pick up my daughter. The weeks following the trial were a blur of media frenzy and legal proceedings. The story of the silent wife who took down a titan of industry became a viral sensation. London Speaks trended on Twitter for days. But London ignored it all. She retreated to the one place Robert could never touch again: her life with Sophie. Robert's empire crumbled faster than it was built. With the FBI raid, the investors fled. Callaway Logistics filed for bankruptcy within the month. The environmental violations alone were enough to bury the company in fines. But the wire fraud charges were what kept Robert in a holding cell, denied bail due to being a flight risk, thanks to his Cayman accounts. London moved back into the Pacific Heights home, not because she wanted the luxury, but because it was Sophie's home. She sold the art, the expensive cars and the furniture that Robert had picked out. She replaced the sterile modern decor with warm colors, soft rugs and messy piles of books. She turned Robert's home office, the room where he had plotted his illegal deals, into a playroom for Sophie. One afternoon, 6 months later, London sat in the garden. The roses were blooming, finally tended to by her own hands, rather than a hired crew. Simon Tate walked through the garden gate. He looked different. He had a new suit, a better haircut, and a confidence that hadn't been there before. The Callaway case had made his career. He was now a partner at his firm. "Lemonade," London offered, pouring a glass from a pitcher. "I'd love some," Simon said, sitting down. "I bring news. Good or bad. Depends on how you look at it. Robert accepted a plea deal this morning." London's hand paused over the glass. "How long?" 12 years, Simon said. "Federal. He'll be out when he's 54, but he's barred from running a public company ever again, and he has to pay restitution to everyone." "And us?" London asked. He signed over his remaining personal assets to a trust for Sophie. It was part of the deal to reduce his sentence. He wrote you a letter." Simon pulled a white envelope from his pocket. London looked at it. The handwriting was familiar, spiky, and aggressive. She felt a phantom twinge of fear, but she pushed it down. She took the envelope. "Do you want me to leave?" Simon asked. "No," London said. "Stay." She opened the letter. "London, you win. I never thought you had it in you. I always thought you were weak because you were kind. I see now that was my mistake. Take care of Sophie. Tell her I'm away on business. Don't let her visit me here. I don't want her to see me in a cage." London folded the letter. There was no apology, no remorse, just an acknowledgement of defeat. It was classic Robert. "He still doesn't get it." "Get it," London said, tearing the letter in half, then into quarters. "He thinks this was a game. He thinks I wanted to win. I just wanted to be free." She dropped the pieces into the empty flower pot on the table. "He won't bother you again," Simon promised. "And if he does, I have the notebook," London finished with a small smile. "Or at least the copy." "Exactly," Simon laughed. Just then the back door banged open. Sophie, now 9, ran out, her hair wild, holding a drawing. "Mum, look, I drew the garden." London's face lit up. She wasn't the ghost in the courtroom anymore. She was vibrant, alive. She pulled Sophie into a hug. "It's beautiful, baby. It's perfect." Simon watched them. He realized that the real victory wasn't the money or the house or the jail sentence. It was this, the simple act of a mother hugging her daughter without fear of who was watching. The years that followed the trial did not move with the frantic energy of the courtroom. They flowed like a slow, steady river. The scandal that had once plastered London's face across every tabloid and newsfeed eventually faded, replaced by the next sensational drama of the rich and corrupt. The name Callaway ceased to be a synonym for scandal and slowly became just another name in the phone book. London Calloway reclaimed her identity not by shouting it from the rooftops, but by living it quietly day by day. She reverted to London Bennett legally, though she kept the Calloway name for Sophie's sake until her daughter left for college. She used a significant portion of her settlement money to establish the Bennett Initiative, a quiet but fierce foundation dedicated to helping women trapped in financially abusive marriages. She didn't just write checks. She sat in small rented rooms with trembling women holding their hands, telling them her story not as a tragedy, but as a road map. She taught them that silence wasn't always weakness. Sometimes it was the necessary camouflage for survival. 10 years passed. London was 49 now. The sharp edges of her stress had softened, replaced by the graceful lines of a life lived on her own terms. Sophie was 19, a sophomore at Stanford, studying environmental law. It was an irony that wasn't lost on either of them, the daughter cleaning up the mess the father's generation had left behind. The Pacific Heights house, once a fortress of isolation, was now just a large, empty building. It echoed too much when Sophie wasn't there. The memories of Robert were gone, scrubbed away by a decade of new paint and new laughter. But the house still felt too big for one person. It was time to downsize. London had bought a smaller, airy cottage near Half Moon Bay, a place where she could hear the ocean at night and paint in the mornings without the fog of the city obscuring the light. The process of moving was cathartic. Room by room, London purged the past. She donated clothes, sold furniture, and shredded documents. It was a physical unburdening to match the emotional one she had undergone years ago. She reached the attic on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The space smelled of dust and cedar. It was filled with the debris of a life-old holiday decorations. Sophie's elementary school art projects and boxes that hadn't been touched since the day Robert was arrested. London moved a stack of heavy crates labeled Kitchen, Misk. Behind them sat a few nondescript cardboard boxes, sealed with yellowing tape marked in Sharpie RC. Personal, office. She paused. She had meant to throw these out years ago. When the FBI had raided the house, they had taken everything that looked like evidence, computers files, ledgers. These boxes must have been deemed irrelevant, the detritus of a man's hobbies or sentimental junk. She had shoved them into the corner and forgotten them, a subconscious refusal to engage with even the remnants of him. Now she looked at them with a detached curiosity. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. He was a number in a federal database, a man who sent generic birthday cards to Sophie that she politely read and then filed away. London grabbed a box cutter and sliced through the tape. The first box was mundane. Old golf trophies, a humidor that smelled of stale tobacco, a stack of Logistics Weekly magazines with his face on the cover. She tossed them into the trash bag. The second box was heavier. She opened it to find a tangle of cables, old chargers, and obsolete electronics, Blackberries, early generation iPhones, digital cameras. It was a graveyard of technology. She sighed, preparing to dump the contents when a smaller box slid out from beneath a nest of wires. It was a sleek black jewelry box, the kind Robert used to give her when he felt guilty about missing an anniversary. London opened it, expecting cufflinks or a tie clip. Instead, nestled in the velvet, was a small silver hard drive. It looked out of place. It wasn't an old, bulky model. It was sleek, heavy, and expensive-looking. It didn't have the standard USB connection. It had a biometric scanner and a port she didn't immediately recognize. London frowned. The FBI had been thorough. They had swept the house for data. How had they missed this? Or had Robert hidden it so well inside a jewelry box? Inside a box of junk that it had simply been overlooked as trash. Curiosity, that old, dangerous instinct, pricked at her. She took the drive downstairs to her study. She found a compatible cable in her own drawer of electronics and plugged it into her laptop. The drive hummed to life. A window popped up on her screen. Enter password. No biometric prompt. Just a text field. London sat back, staring at the blinking cursor. It felt like he was in the room with her, challenging her one last time. She tried Sophie. Access denied. She tried Calloway. Access denied. She tried Orion. Access denied. She tried his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary. Access denied. She rubbed her temples. What would Robert use? He was a narcissist, but he was also paranoid. He wouldn't use something easily guessable by the authorities. But he was also arrogant. He would use something that he felt only he understood, or something that mocked the people he deceived. She thought back to the trial. She closed her eyes and visualized him on the stand, the way he looked at her with pity, calling her weak and unstable. Then a memory surfaced, not from the trial, but from the night before everything changed. The night she found the black notebook. It was November 14th, the date he had started his corruption, the date he had truly sold his soul for profit. But there was something else, a phrase he used to say when he was drunk on his own success. "We are the kings of the New World." She typed King's New World. Access denied. She was overthinking it. Robert was complex in his schemes, but simple in his motivations. Money, power, himself. She remembered the letter he wrote her from prison. I see now that was my mistake. She looked at the date on the first page of the black notebook again in her mind. 11:14. She typed 1144 Orion. The screen flickered. A green progress bar appeared. Access granted. London's breath hitched. The folder opened. She expected to see financial spreadsheets or scanned contracts. She expected the boring, bureaucratic evidence of his crimes. But the folder was full of audio files, hundreds of them, labeled simply by date. She put on her headphones. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. She clicked on a file dated July 12th, the year before the divorce. Click. Robert's voice filled her ears, crisp and clear. It wasn't his public voice, the charming baritone he used for investors. It was his private voice, calculating, cold and dripping with disdain. July 12th. London is getting suspicious. She asked about the Cayman trip again today. She's like a dog with a bone. I need to handle this. I spoke to Haynes. He suggests we up the dosage of the anti-anxiety meds. If she's foggy, she won't have the energy to check the bank statements. I hate doing this, but I have to protect the empire. She's becoming a liability. If I have to drug her to keep her quiet, so be it. London ripped the headphones off her heart, hammering against her ribs. The room suddenly felt freezing. He had confessed. He wasn't just gaslighting her. He was actively, chemically manipulating her. The fatigue, the brain fog, the days she couldn't get out of bed. It wasn't depression. It was him. He had been poisoning her mind to protect his wallet. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. Even after 10 years, he could still hurt her. She forced herself to put the headphones back on. She needed to know. She needed to hear it all. She clicked another file. This one was dated 2 weeks before the trial. The timestamp was 2:00 a.m. Prescott says we have it in the bag, Robert's voice sneered. He thinks she's broken. But I'm worried. She's too quiet. London isn't stupid. She's just dormant. If she knows... No, she can't know. But I'm not taking chances. I've moved the real money. The Orion account. That's a decoy. It holds the bribe money, the operational slush fund. Let them find it. Let them freeze it. London leaned closer to the screen. The real fortune. Robert continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The liquid assets from the China deal. Over 40 million. It's in the Bitcoin wallet. Cold storage. The key is in the safe deposit box in Zurich, Bank of Daria. Box number 8940. When this blows over, even if I take a hit, I'll be king again. London hit pause. The silence in the room was deafening. $40 million. The Orion account, the one the FBI had seized, the one that had been drained to pay the fines, and restitution had held about $5 million. Robert had gone to jail claiming poverty. He had played the part of the fallen tycoon perfectly. He had surrendered his assets, or so everyone thought. But he had lied. Even in defeat, he was planning his resurrection. He was getting out in 2 years. He was going to walk out of prison, get on a plane to Switzerland, and disappear with $40 million while Sophie was still paying off student loans. London sat back in her chair. The sun began to set outside the window, casting long orange shadows across the floorboards. The moral thing to do was clear. She should call Simon. She should call the FBI. They would reopen the case. They would seize the drive. Robert would get another 10 years added to his sentence for concealing assets and bankruptcy fraud. The money would go to the government. She looked at the phone on her desk. She picked it up. Then she looked at the framed photo of Sophie next to her laptop. Sophie, who worked 2 jobs in the summer to pay for her apartment. Sophie, who wanted to start a non-profit legal clinic, but was worried about the funding. Sophie, who had suffered for years because of her father's greed. If London called the FBI, Robert would stay in prison. But the money. The money would vanish into the black hole of federal forfeiture. It wouldn't help Sophie. It wouldn't help the women at the Bennett Initiative. London thought about justice. True justice. The law had punished Robert for his crimes against the state, but who had punished him for his crimes against her? For the pills, for the gaslighting, for the years of life he had stolen. London smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile. It wasn't the smile of a victim. It was the smile of the woman who had sat in a courtroom for 3 days and said nothing until the trap was set. She put the phone down. She opened a new browser window. She searched for Bank of Daria Zurich. She pulled up the contact information for their private client services. She didn't call the FBI. She dialed the Swiss number. Grüezi, Bank of Daria, a polite accented voice answered. Hello. London said, her voice steady and calm, the same voice that had silenced a courtroom 10 years ago. I am calling regarding a custodial transfer for safe deposit box 8940. I possess the digital key and the authorization codes. One moment, madame. Let me verify. London waited. She watched the dust motes dancing in the last light of the sun. She felt incredibly light. Verification successful, the voice returned. How would you like to proceed? I would like to arrange a full transfer of the contents to a new secure account, London said. And then I would like the box to be closed. Very well. And shall we dispose of any physical items remaining in the box? No, London said. Leave a note. A note, madam? Yes, just a small piece of paper. What should it say? London looked at the hard drive one last time. Write this. The debt is paid. L. Robert Calloway had taught her that silence was a weapon, but he had forgotten to teach her that knowledge was power. And when he walked out of those prison gates in 2 years, expecting a kingdom, he would find nothing but ash. London hung up the phone. She unplugged the drive, walked to the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. She watched the plastic melt and curl, the secrets vanishing into smoke. She stood up, brushed the dust off her jeans, and walked out of the room. The house was sold. The boxes were packed. It was time to go. Sophie was coming home for the weekend, and they had a future to plan. And that is the story of London Calloway, a woman who proved that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. She turned her silence into a shield and her patience into a sword. Robert thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize London had already flipped the board long before he made his first move. What do you think? Was London right to take the final fortune for her daughter, or should she have turned it over to the authorities? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more true-to-life dramas about secrets, lies, and redemption, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest people have the loudest minds.